Hey, I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of Grace, Grit, and Grounds. It's good to be back in the shop, and I'll be honest, it's been a few days since I've had the opportunity to do any real work, and it's a Sunday afternoon, and the sermon has been preached, and it's time to relax a little bit. So I'm just trying to find the center of this particular piece of wood. It's spalted curly maple, or at least that's what I was told. You can see the X is clear, and look at the grain. This is going to turn into a really beautiful bowl. The hard part about it was finding which side did I want to be the top and which did I want to be the bottom. But figuring that out didn't take long, and, well, there's something honest about starting with a rough block of wood. There's no finish on it yet. There's no shine, no promise, really, at least not to most people. It's just weight in my hands and a shape that doesn't yet make sense. This piece of wood came from a small mill just across the border in Indiana. I picked it up for next to nothing. The boards were, well, they weren't good for framing or furniture. They're just a bit too soft and a bit too compromised structurally to be reliable. But to a woodworker like me, this is, well, honestly, this is treasure. Like I said a moment ago, this is curly maple, and it's spalted. If you don't know what that is, or if you don't work with wood, you may not really know what that means, and it may not mean much to you. But spalting is what happens when fungi or mushrooms or whatever begin to break the wood down. It's kind of like a slow decay. The wood starts to soften, the strength is lost a little bit in it. And for the most part, people that are builders or contractors or trying to build cabinets or furniture, they tend to avoid these things because, well, they're just not very structurally sound. It's a bit too soft. And yet it produces these incredible lines, dark rivers winding through the pale grain, patterns you couldn't design if you tried. It's like God is painting while the material itself is dying. It's as though decay creates its own beauty. That idea has always stopped me in my tracks because in some ways it's a lot like us. Scripture says in Psalm 51:17, "A broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise." It's not that he's looking for a polished heart or even a strong one. I think God is looking for a broken one. God has always been in the business of working with material that the world would throw away. You can see that I'm beginning to rough this square blank out and turn it into round. I have a friend of mine who says that I ought to not use the square blanks, that I ought to put it on the bandsaw and make it round before I stick it onto the block. But there's just something I enjoy about taking something square and making it round, imposing my will upon it, if you will. When you first put a blank like this in the lathe, it does feel awkward, and I will admit it's out of balance a little bit. It wants to shake itself apart, and you can tell from the early parts of that video that's exactly what it was doing. My tool chatters and my hands, well, it's almost like they have to learn the rhythm before anything smooth can happen. Spiritual formation often feels like that. We want instant transformation. I know I do. We want clean lines and immediate purpose, but to be honest, most growth starts with friction, noise, resistance. We've talked about this in the past. A whole lot of spinning without any obvious progress sometimes, especially right now, as I've got it into round, but I'm trying to smooth out the sides just a little bit using my square cutter. And I'm just trying to get some of the tear outs and some of the end grain to sort of mesh and to look good. And I know I'm using a lot of words that folks that aren't woodworkers probably don't know, but you can tell as I'm running the tool along the top of the blank as it's spinning that it's now finally coming into round. It's now at a place where I feel like I can do something more with it. Hebrews 12 talks about discipline producing a harvest of righteousness. But in the moment, it feels painful, not pleasant. Anyone who's walked through real discipleship knows that's true, and that's kind of how I feel when I'm turning this block and getting it where it needs to be. I'm now trying to get the tenon cut, the foot, if you will, of this bowl. This is what's going to sit in the four-jaw chuck as I'm getting ready to make the hollow part of the bowl turn and look more, well, more presentable. And if you think about discipleship, I think that's really what it comes down to. You don't become something new all of a sudden without losing something old. And honestly, sometimes losing something old that's been a part of you for a while can feel a bit violent. Just like as I'm turning this and trying to get it right, the wood shavings are flying everywhere. The edges on the bowl are starting to get removed, and you're starting to see that form emerge because the material that's in the way is being removed. Jesus said, "Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." That sounds kind of poetic until you're the one being reshaped, till you're starting to have pieces fly off of you. I have to change my tool out, and I'm using a round cutter now on this. This is really my finisher. This is the one that I'm going to do a lot of my shaping with. I'll get the interior done with this, and I'm trying to knock off the sides and give this more of a bowl shape instead of more of a hockey puck shape that it is right now. And I hope that you can begin to see it, that bowl, that it's in there. I can. The truth is, it was always in there. It's now just becoming a little more visible. I think that's one of the most beautiful truths in the Christian life is that God doesn't just improve us. He's not a self-help guru. He reveals what he intended from the very beginning. Ephesians says we are his workmanship, his craftsmanship. The word there carries the idea of something being made with intention, not mass-produced. Creation itself tells the story. God makes things that are useful, but he also makes things that are beautiful, extravagantly so. And you're going to see that as we start to make this bowl turn into something really gorgeous. You're going to see the beauty coming out of a piece that really would have been used for a fire pit. No one needed this curly grain, spalted piece of wood, really. Straight grain would have done just fine. But I do love the creation of this. God seems to enjoy complexity. He enjoys texture and surprise. And there's a lot of surprise in this bowl as I'm pulling it off the worm screw and getting ready to turn it around. You know, I'm always amazed at the beauty and the uniqueness of each piece that I turn. But here's the strange part. Most people who see the finished bowl will simply say, "Wow, that's nice." They may pick it up, they may run a finger along the inside or the outside, and they may even hold it up to the light and see it shine. But I don't think anybody's going to be able to pick up this bowl at the end of the build and say, "Yeah, that was curly maple." I mean, I'm going to have to tell them when they buy it from me because they just won't know what species it is. They won't really trace the spalting lines with their eyes. They won't feel the subtle undulations in the curl. They'll just see a really nice bowl. And you know something? That's okay. Not everyone has to understand the process to appreciate the results. But sometimes I do wonder how much beauty in the world goes unnoticed because we don't know what we're looking at. You can see I'm starting to hollow the interior. I typically step up. Lately I've been doing this. I've been using a Forstner bit on my tailstock, and I know, again, these are words that most don't really recognize, but I try to step it up. So I use a really tiny bit, and then I will pull it out and put a slightly larger one in as I'm trying to get the interior, hollowed out where it needs to be. Turning the inside is different, though, and that's the truth. You can't really see what's happening easily, and honestly, the way the video is, you probably won't be able to see it much at all. But it's happening. And even though I'm working blind when I'm in there, I'm trusting it by the feel of the tool and the sound of the cut. Even sometimes the shape of the sawdust that's coming out of it, I can tell if it's turning the way it needs to. If it catches, I can feel it. If it has problems and the gouge goes a little too deep, then I know it. That's kind of what I'm doing. See, and that's what inner work in our lives is like. Public change gets applause when we have those big happy testimonies that everybody can see. But I think private transformation is what I'm seeking most of the time in my own life. That private transformation that happens quietly, oftentimes painfully, and really there's no one else to see. It's just something that you and God are dealing with. Scripture often talks about the hidden heart, the inner person, the place where our motives and our real selves live. God is not content to shape only what people see. He often goes after the interior. In fact, that's the part that he loves the most. And just like with this bowl, the inside determines the usefulness. If the walls are too thick, it's heavy and clumsy. If it's too thin, it fails under pressure. Strength and vulnerability have to be held in tension. I keep coming back to this spalting. What made this wood less valuable for construction is exactly what makes it beautiful here. You're starting to really begin to see it as I'm preparing to get the center hollowed, and it won't take long now that I've hogged out some of the material from the inside with my drill bits. But I think that very weakness of the spalting becomes the feature that I'm trying to bring out as clear as I can with my turning. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians that God's power is made perfect in weakness, not in spite of it, but in it. We spend so much energy trying to hide marks left by life, the cracks and the scars, the places where time or pain has softened us. But those are often the places where grace leaves the most visible patterns. Spalted wood tells a story. It's unique, and each piece is so different from any other. You'll never see another piece of wood like this, ever, exactly, which is something I find incredibly human-like in that. Something happened to this piece of wood. It didn't remain pristine. It endured that process, and it changed forever. Now it carries character. You can see as I'm making this interior turn into something that I think is going to be lovely, I'm just working on the edges. I like a nice rounded outside. That's the way I like my bowls for the most part. Sometimes I go with a cauldron shape and put a lip on it, but not this time. The bowl I cut here, I just want to have that nice clean lines and rounded space. I mentioned before in a previous video that I've been using a new tool set that I got from one of the local wood turning stores, and I'm really happy with it. It's got a bit of weight to it. You can see that I'm just drawing the scraper from the center to the edge. I'm trying to work that, well, the inside wall of the bowl so that it has that nice interior shape. And I don't know, I'm trying to create like a C, if you will, the letter C shape on the wall of the bowl, which I'm worried about because, well, the reality is that if I turn too deep or I hit too hard, that it's possible that I could blow the bowl out and it could just destroy. And because it's spalted, the wood is a bit soft. So I guess I got to the point where I felt like I couldn't go any further without causing damage to the bowl itself and, wreck this project. So it's time to start the sanding process. And, well, the sanding process is not easy. Sanding is quiet work. It's less dramatic, especially when you're looking at a video, because when you start the sanding, it's just there's no big curls flying off. There's no big things of wood that's floating around. It's just dust, and it's slowly refining that surface. I'm trying to remove the tool marks on the outside and the inside so that when somebody picks this bowl up, they won't see evidence of my scraper on the outside of it. This might be the least glamorous part of making a bowl, but it's where the piece really becomes pleasant to touch. Sanctification is often like sanding. It's slow and repetitive, almost invisible day to day. Prayer, scripture, obedience in small things, showing up again and again when God asks us to. It's nothing flashy, but over time, this roughness gives way to gentleness. The fruit of the Spirit kind of change, you know what I'm saying? It's just, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful times in creating this kind of art. I tend to step down my sandpaper, so I start off with something like 40 or 60 or even sometimes 80 grit and just try to turn it into shape, get rid of those tool marks. I find that the aggressive sandpaper is good for getting rid of those tool marks. And as I step it down, sometimes I have to just take a minute and blow some of the dust out. When you're sanding a project like this, sometimes the dust gets in the way. It gets into the cracks that I'm trying to sand, and it makes it hard to really knock down those tool marks. So periodically stopping to blow out the dust is exactly what needs to happen in order to make this project really sing. Even though this is not the most glamorous part of the crafting process, and I know some of the folks that I talk to that do these kinds of bowls, they often dislike the sanding process, and there's different ways you can do it. Some people use a drill, other people use a special tool that has a head in it that you can stick in there so you don't have to get your hands in there. And I know that there are people out there that will critique the way I'm doing this and say that I'm doing it all wrong, but I'll be honest, I like to feel the wood as I'm sanding it down. You'll notice that I'm wearing a new pair of gloves from the last few times that I've made these kind of videos, and I needed a new pair of leather gloves, something that I can protect my fingers and hands as I'm turning this, but also still have a feel for the wood that I really need to have. And to be honest with you, I like to get right in there. I like to feel the shape unfold underneath me, and I can tell even through the gloves that it's coming into the right focus. Occasionally, like I said before, I have to blow some dust out just to get it out of the way, but you can tell that it's really coming into shape. You can see the definition now on the rim of the bowl. And it's hard sometimes to see it as I'm spinning it around and around, but every time I stop it, you ought to be able to see the grain start to pop out and really turn into that lovely spalted, beautiful appearance that we're looking at. I tend to spend the bulk of my time with the more aggressive sandpapers, but once I start stepping into the 230s and the 320 and sometimes 400 grain, it I'm at the point now where I'm doing less sanding and I'm doing more polishing. I'm getting it ready for what the next step is going to be. And that really, although I enjoy every aspect of making these bowls, some obviously I have more enjoyment out of than others. And my favorite moment is the finish. I'm using Danish oil today because Danish oil doesn't just sit on the top like paint or other things. It soaks in, it penetrates the fibers, and suddenly the grain comes alive and the depth can just appears and pops out, and you can see that contrast between the light grain and the dark spaltedness when it happens. It sharpens into focus. It's beautiful. What looked flat, now has full dimensions. It's funny because, the reality is that it was always there. The oil didn't create it. It just reveals it. It brings it into that beautiful place. And I think that's a beautiful picture of grace. God doesn't make us human by coating us with something artificial. He restores what was meant to be there all along. His Spirit saturates us, not just merely covers us. Colossians says, Christ in you is the hope of glory. Not Christ painted on you, or not Christ that you put on like a pair of gloves, but that Christ that's in us. Now comes that moment of truth. I have a little board that I stick underneath the bowl because when I apply the oil, I don't want it to get on my lathe, because sometimes it'll dry and get sticky and hard because, well, that's what Danish oil does, is it penetrates and then it preserves and protects. And that's part of the transformation process. That's part of the formation process, really, if you get down to it. This is what sanctification does. It penetrates, it preserves, it brings out the things that God wants us to have. Now I'm going to do this really slow. Can you see the darkness now as it's starting to really pop? You can watch as that spalting darkens and how the curl begins to shimmer as the light hits it. Once at what once looked dull and almost lifeless, it now almost glows. At least it does for me. Transformation doesn't erase the past. It really transfigures it. And that's the beauty that we see here. And here we are. From a block most builders would have ignored to something useful, something that can hold keys or snacks or whatever daily life needs to set down for a moment. I love making things like this because it feels like participating in something deeply human. We are made in the image of the Creator, so we create, we shape, we bring order from chaos and beauty from roughness, usefulness from what looked expendable. Not everyone will care what kind of wood it is. Not everyone will notice the spalting or the curl. Some will simply see a bowl, and that's okay. The maker knows. I know. And maybe that's enough, because the Christian story says that we, too, are being shaped, sometimes through pressure, sometimes through loss, sometimes through seasons that soften us in ways we didn't ask for. And somehow, in the hands of God, even decay can become design. Even weakness can become witness. Even ordinary lives can hold extraordinary beauty. So if you feel a little rough around the edges, a little out of balance, maybe even like the material the world doesn't have much use for, take heart. The work isn't finished yet. I appreciate you taking some time with me today as I spend a little time in the woodshop seeking some wisdom from the master maker himself. It's been fun to get back in. It's been relaxing and even a bit cathartic as I remind myself yet again just how great God really is. I hope that something that I said today resonated with someone. If you want to, feel free to drop a message in the comments. If you have a question about woodworking or really anything that we've talked about on this channel so far, please, by all means, drop a message. I would love to have that conversation with you. But again, I want to thank everyone for joining us for this episode of Grace, Grit, and Grounds. As always, I want to encourage you that, well, grace builds what grit sustains. It's been fantastic spending time with you. And here's the bowl. The mostly finished product. I still have to fix the foot. But not every project is finished in one go. Thanks for joining me. Until we see each other again.